Hello, welcome to History in Lowell. My name is Maritza Grooms. I'm joined by my personal professor and bestie, Bob Forrant.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And we're joined today by a very special guest, City Councilor Corey Robinson.
Thank you for having me, and good afternoon.
Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
It's quite an honor for many reasons. You have a lot of historical firsts, and I think we're going to get into that today, but they're also tied directly to Lowell's history. So I'm excited.
There's a conversation long in the making. I've been looking forward to sitting down with the two of you, and I love the work you do, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, together we make a difference.
Absolutely.
That sounds familiar.
Now, you guys have a lot in common, right? You're both living in Centerville.
Right, my city council.
Yeah, you're city councilor, and you're labor guys. Yes.
that.
I have a lot of respect for labor guys. I've got union in my blood too. You know, I was gonna say my blood bleeds blue, but that's a different thing. We both say that. But let's get into that. So Corey, you were born and raised in Lowell, right?
Yes.
And we know, as you know from this book, Black stories aren't always told here, but we're really trying to do a better job of that, like with this book and with this show, and just stories of underrepresented groups in Lowell traditionally that aren't told. So I think it's great that we have you today to be able to tell the story of a young Black person who was born here and now rose to prominence as the first Black city councilor.
Yeah, thankfully, again, even my involvement with the union, it's, I think coming from my household where it was, Irish mom, Black dad, I had a lot of ties to different communities just because by birth. And so I would credit, honestly though, the majority of what I think got me ready to even consider running for city council was my involvement with labor, because just the way labor organizations function and the skill set that you develop while being involved and engaged in the union, it lends itself to advocacy for others, greater good, finding compromise and negotiation, dealing with policy that kind of, whether it be conditions of employment, quality of life within the work, I mean, all of those things kind of creates the perfect storm for, I think, people that really can apply those skills into civic engagement, whether it be, local, state, federal. I think that, to me, is one of the best training grounds available, because I think it allows you to approach it from a different perspective too. It's not the traditional political science route that some people take, but more of the boots on the ground and calluses on your hand. And so you can kind of appreciate the difficulty of people that struggle to put food on the table or keep lights on over their head. And so coming from that background and now being in a position where you get to help work on policy with that in the back of your mind at all times, I'm really thankful that the opportunity was presented itself, and then I was able to get the support from my neighbors.
It's interesting. I mean, I love the way that you describe that, because I think that the average person has a somewhat stilted view, somewhat warped view, I guess, of like what unions do. And the way that you laid that out, I think, is really beautiful. And the way that I think about it as well from my time as a business agent for a union, and that you do have to figure out compromise. You can't go into an employer and demand all of everything and expect something good. You have to try to understand the dynamics, figure out, and so I think it is a schooling ground in a way for being an effective representative for a neighborhood or for a community. And so, I mean, was that something you came to over time, or did you sort of think at some point in the union part of it, well, maybe one day I'll sort of blossom out into this other avenue, or did the change in the electoral structure in the city encourage you more to think about possibly running, maybe, or like how did you come to sort of that idea to run for council?
Excellent question. Realistically, when I was involved with the labor organization, I never even considered local politics or any of that stuff. I was pretty much just daily fight. Wages and healthcare and dental and medical, and why are we doing things this way, and I think we can do things better that way, advocating for my colleagues. I mean, and then I had left Lowell as an employee, worked in another community, and I had heard rumblings about, you know, some litigants working to change the at-large system. And, you know, I had heard that over time, and I was like, there's no way that's gonna go. And then when it picked up steam, it was like the opportunity presented itself. It basically was just there, and it kind of all came together at that point. And just through even preliminary conversations, it was like, this is something I want to really get involved in, because I didn't know much about the political end of it. I outside of negotiating with, say, a city manager or their administration, I never really, a few times as a labor leader, I mean, I would have to address the council, but they were usually over disagreements. It wasn't like we were working collaboratively on things. It was more or less me trying to put my members' perspective into the public view. So when I met with a few people, and you know, when I did commit and decide, I remember one of the gentlemen I had a conversation with, they basically said, you know, I've been around politics a long time, and I think that the training you received in the capacity of a labor leader kind of helped facilitate a lot of the skill sets that I think are going to translate very well into decision making and all the things we mentioned already. So it wasn't something that while I was doing it, I ever looked at and said, I want to end up going this direction. That direction kind of just came about. And again,
Actually, probably better that came about that way.
Yeah, organically.
Because it made sense.
Yeah.
It's just there's a logic to it.
Right, and I think for me, on a personal level, I respect leaders who aren't going out there like, oh, I'm the person for this job, and with ego, leading with ego. You were leading how you are. I'm here, I'm humble, and I'm from the city, and I've got some ideas, and I feel like that's how you've approached this work.
See, and I think with any of this, again, it goes back to my time with the union. I didn't have your typical labor leader position, so to say. So like in a lot of organizations, if you're a labor leader of, say, public health nurses, that's all you really focus on, you understand. And most of the time, you probably are a public health nurse, say. So you're advocating for what you do. I had a mixed bag of about 240 employees, all municipal. I had DPW, I had parking enforcement, I had dispatches, I had public health nurses, I mean, the list goes on. And so I kind of learned early on in that role, you can't advocate for any group, any person, any community, unless you truly understand that community. And so I had to put the time in. Understand what is it that our public health nurses do? What is it that our DPW does? What is it that parking enforcement officers do? Because even though we were a group collectively, there was so many subgroups under that umbrella. And so when I'd sit at the table with the administration, now there was times when I'd go in and there'd be maybe myself and two others, and we're up against a team of 9 people on the other side of the table that have had months and months to prepare for these discussions with every kind of piece of data imaginable. And here I am with a worn union contract, and I knew my parameters, but bringing in all the data points and the speaking points, and I think what it always came down to is truly understanding what those jobs were about and what the value of the service each of those jobs provided. And so as a result, all the data in the world wasn't gonna kind of back me off of points that I'm explaining. Well, I get it, but we can find efficient and effective ways of doing things, but at the same time, you know, all these other factors come into play. So perfect example is, yeah, you can get by with less employees in, say, the DPW. But now when you start factoring the wear and tear on the human body, and now workers' comp claims and all of those things, that's where you have to kind of be able to compromise and negotiate. And so I think all of it forces you to really think through. And I always tell everybody, to this day, I've never been the type of person that likes yes men or women around me. I want people around me that are going to challenge.
Well, you like us then.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but that's what keeps you sharp. I think that's what.
100%
So by the
agree.
time you bring
Yeah.
a thought or an idea that you had forward, it's been vetted a couple
Yeah.
dozen times over by people that you trusted. And
Yeah.
Right.
I want you to get me to back off of my stance on this. And along the way, maybe I throw the lump of clay in the middle of the table. All three of us have a hand on it, and at the end, we'll come up with a sculpture. But it's going to have a piece of
Yeah.
all of our own, you know, imagination behind it. And I think that's the same way you do with policy. It's the same way you do with trade, labor, any of that stuff. Because meeting with your members, so many times I've gotten great ideas from my members. I've thrown a general, this is what I'm thinking, please give me feedback. And by the time that gets presented to the administration at the table, it's fine-tuned, and there was maybe 25 people's input along the way to get it to that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of this really comes down to is not just conversation, but I think it's really understanding who and what you're trying to advocate for in either of these roles, whether it's a union advocate, whether it's a City of Lowell elected official advocating for 13,000 in a district or 115,000 citywide. And as a district rep, I don't think that really makes a difference to me because you have to understand, I think, the nuances of each district. But again, you have 115,000 residents, and I find a lot of the issues that impact residents in my district are impacting residents elsewhere in the city as well. So it's, I'd say it's very similar, just larger numbers, the volume's more.
You mentioned understanding, you know, the people that you're serving. What would you say is something that you do personally that you go out to understand each community, like beyond your district, right? What do you do? I know what you do, but tell the people.
I think my whole life, I've been a pretty social person, and it's like I constantly am out and about, and I enjoy conversation. A lot of times,
You everywhere all the time.
but I enjoy conversation, and a lot of times, I enjoy even the conversation that some people find challenging and difficult. And I think it goes back to, I've never had a group of yes people around me, so I welcome the criticism. And again, same thing with the union as it is with the city. You're not going to satisfy everybody, and you have to know that going into it. And there's different groups of people. There's people that are going to take a hard stance, that are in opposition. And some of those people are willing to compromise and work towards a middle ground as long as you incorporate some of their concerns. There's other people that basically say, no, it's my way or the highway. I'll take my ball and bat and go home. And you know, it's going into it if you're aware that you're not going to be able to satisfy everybody. I think that also allows, again, if you're a social person and you go out and have the conversations with members in the community in all areas, it doesn't matter where, when, who, how you identify, it's your input is going into this lump of clay that we're all working on, so to say again. And I think that's what I enjoy the most. I mean, a lot of times you have great conversations over a burger and a beer at a local establishment just because. I think growing up in Lowell, you've seen people that have, whether they're from here, have migrated here, Lowell has always been, and it's funny because in the labor world, we would challenge stuff in Boston at the Department of Labor Relations. And all the old timers that work down there, like the attorneys and everything, would say, I don't know what's in the water in Lowell, but people are engaged when it comes to politics, when it comes to work-related issues like labor and all that. For some reason, Lowell has bred that for years.
Since our inception, you might say.
It's
Yeah.
I mean, Lucy Larkham, it's celebrated. Like, people's involvement and engagement in everyday life and the stuff on the ground is something that Lowell has kind of elevated forever. And I think the city was built on that. And so to really take a step back and realize, like, living in the city, it's all about advocacy. It's all about engagement. It's all about rolling up your sleeves and getting involved to make the change, or to lay that cobblestone street, or to build those canals. This is really a hard-working city in a very involved and engaged community. So I think just growing up here, it's inherent that
It's in the water.
it's in the water.
Yeah. I mean, you can say, I mean, again, as somebody who teaches about Lowell history, as well as having lived here now for not my whole life, but for the last 20 some odd years, that as I think about the history, see what you think, that I feel like the two most dramatic changes in the city were around desegregating the schools in the 80s and early 90s, and then the just settled voting rights suit. And in both instances, both of those suits were led by persons of color who, at the time of their fighting, did not have quote-unquote elected power per se, but were willing to stick their necks out and, as you say, advocate for and defend their right to be here and improve the lives mainly of their kids, especially the school one. And so I find that really important to teach so that people grasp that, because I think it's too easy for people to be dismissive of that history, and the history doesn't get taught. And so I wish, I mean, we talk a lot here about the history and wishing it could be taught more, but I don't know if you think, like, is that a fit? Do you think about that history somewhat that way, or do you have a different way of thinking about it, or it's sort
Especially
of if
having
we're trying
grown
to
up
organize it?
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think those are excellent points, and I think even the desegregation of the schools, I think I saw pros and cons with it. I think it was something that was necessary at the time. I myself grew up in the city and attended public school while it was neighborhood-based. You had your pros and cons. So I remember growing up in the Highlands, and I'm 45 now. Where I lived, I went to the Morey School. Then I went to the Daly School. And that was around the time we really got a huge migration of the Southeast Asian population. So where I lived, there was a large amount of Southeast Asian families that moved in right next door to me. And so, I mean, language barriers, cultural differences, but at the same time, like, those were kids I played with in the neighborhood, playing marbles and all these things, and in the classrooms. So I saw the benefit of the neighborhood school system in my area that I grew up. Yes, it was somewhat segregated, but it was also blended as a result of that migration. Now, there weren't many black families in the district. We would go to the Daly School, and predominantly it was white families that lived up around the Daly School. And so you had some Spanish, but not much. So it was some segregation going on, but not to the extent where it was like in other areas of the city. I think by changing that dynamic, it helped to blend the schools, but I think it hurt the sense of community and neighborhood.